This last word, comics, that's how we used to spell it in the Philippines. I grew up, those were my first books. The comics used to buy on the street, and I was crazy for them. And they were usually very cheaply made and very garish and terrifying. I loved horror, first of all, as a kid. So comedy and horror, those were, you know, the people's literature. And I loved the visuals, you know, and I loved the little bubbles. And I started out writing, I made my own comics. So it was, these were my books. Like this, I'd fold the paper over. I'm sure many of you have done this. And I'd have the boxes, the panels, and I have titles, and then, you know, in the back, the end, published by, and then I'd make up some publishing company. And, you know, it was very, very real to me. So I don't look down on any of these elements in my craft because they are with me to this day. They've influenced me. And my novels, being that this is the center for fiction, are grounded in a real love of language and imagination, and how there's music and language, and how the characters have to be complicated and messy and very as fleshed out as possible and kind of unpredictable. And all of that is connected to my training as an actor. I did not come to this country and go to a writing program. I mean, I'm pretty self-taught. So it came from starting with this popular art form, the comics, and listening to radio dramas. I didn't have television until I was much older in Manila. So I think in a way that was really, really good for me. It was good for me to have to imagine, to listen and to imagine. And it was a ritual in our house on Friday nights. My grandmother and I would listen to particular serials, you know, drama serials, horror again. I loved it. And they'd have these special effects and really corny stuff, just totally thrilling. And I was allowed to stay up late because it was a Friday night. And I had to imagine all the spirit world and what the people looked like, you know, who were talking. And so much was left to my imagination that I became, I think, a very observant child. And we're talking 6, 7 years old, okay, into 10 and 11. And that's the age my father brought home a television set. And we didn't know what to do with it. It was like, what is this? And it was fascinating, but that's something else. I don't really count TV as being that influential, because by that time, I think by 10 or 11, I was pretty set. And I was a moviegoer. I saw everything. I loved the idea of this big screen and being lost in the dark and sort of the life in the dark. And so, and that and going to Mass. I want you to know that religious spectacle in the Philippines is a big deal. And we take those things very seriously. And, you know, it's about costumes and wailing and Latin and grandeur and a lot of incense and people fainting all the time. And believing in miracles and in saints and the power of saints. So for me, that has also shaped the way I imagine my writing. So, when we talk about craft, well, craft. I am not one of those writers who, and I have writer friends who do this, who map out a lot of what they're going to be writing. Even if they veer from it, you know, it makes them feel comforted to have, you know, the little cards and to kind of have a little outline of where their book is going to go. I usually start with either a snatch of conversation that I've overheard, written down, and haunts me, something I've seen, someone I've seen who fascinates me, and they disappear from my life, and I have to sort of really create a whole history for them, and they become my central character, or maybe one of the very important secondary characters. Or it's an event that occurs. In Toxicology, I will admit, it was the death of Heath Ledger. I had been asked by this visual artist to contribute a short story for a book she was doing, where she was photographing sculptures she had created specifically for all the different writers. It was like a big performance collaborative project. These are things I get roped into all the time. Anyway, the end product was going to be a book, but she actually did make sculptures, and the sculptures were all female characters, and she asked all the writers to create a character with a name, and to write a little story, a very, very short story. She said 1 page, 2 pages at most. And then you send it to her, and she was going to create your character. It had to be from this one character's point of view, it had to be female. And I was like, okay, you know, my novel was due. Had been due for years, and I had started a novel that, I mean, I was well into it, and I wasn't happy with it. Not because the writing wasn't pleasing me, but because I felt like I was at a point in this manuscript where I didn't really care what happened. So, you know, even though I loved all my characters, I always loved my characters, but I thought, not right now. And it was kind of going nowhere for me. And so I had this looming deadline, this artist that wouldn't leave me alone. I mean, she nagged me every day by email. And she's from Berlin, so she had this way. And I thought, oh, Jesus Christ, no, leave me alone. But then this tragic death happened, and I remember my daughter came home and told me about it, which I kind of appropriated that moment in the opening chapter. But what surprised me was the response of so many New Yorkers and people I knew who were my age, who were not running around going to see Heath Ledger movies. I mean, not really. I mean, they might have gone to see some of his grittier films when he was a nobody, but it wasn't like, you know, they were out there going to see Batman or something. But a lot of people were upset, and I think it was the period that was very dark, and it was the start of, you know, where is this country going kind of mood. A funk had come over the nation, and a funk in my community in New York, a funk that was palpable. And it was so palpable that I thought, this is it. This is the moment I sort of want to go with. And I have lived in this city since 1977. I've pretty much stayed in the same neighborhood. I've moved around, you know, 2 or 3 streets, but all in the same little area. So I've seen a lot of things come and go, and I've seen neighborhoods really, really changing and evolving. And I thought, I need to confront what's right in front of my face. And the palpability of that tragedy, that waste, that young talent, you know, going like a flame like that. You know, it's a cliche. It happens. It goes with the territory. But I think coupled with the mood and the atmosphere around so many of us, it was a perfect place to start. And I started by writing my 1 page for this wacky and persistent Berlin artist, and I wrote it from this woman's point of view, who I decided was a filmmaker. I mean, she's a filmmaker, but she makes you know, underground movies. So it was the opposite of what an actor of Ledger's stature was doing. But that she was reacting to this event, and death was all around her. And it was written from the first person point of view, which I later changed when I actually dove into the novel. And writing the story was a great catharsis, and I'm very instinctive. That's one of my things about craft. Really, you kind of have to trust your gut. As your professor, I can tell you, do this, do that, cut this, cut that. But in the end, you really know what your book is supposed to be, I believe. And you just have to know why. You might argue with me, but that's not the way you want to go. So you have to be at a place where it's very clear to you that, no, the book has to end this way, and that's a great idea, Jessica, but that is not me, that's you, okay? So it's instinct, and as I've gotten older, I've really gotten to trust mine, and to kind of not be afraid. And if it's my mistake, it's my mistake, but, you know, I want to be able to sleep at night knowing I saw the book through the way I wanted to see it through. So when I finished this very short piece, I had a name for the character. She was Mimi. I didn't have a last name, but I thought, this is weirdly satisfying. I mean, I've sort of started something that is exciting for me. And the artist was very happy with the piece, and she created this super ugly creature, but it was really interesting, kind of a terrifying looking woman, which is not how I envision my character. But it opened a door, and I talked to my editor, and it was a big deal because I had this deadline, and I said, I want to start from scratch. I want to scrap that other book and start from scratch. And he said, you're kidding. And I said, no. And I swear I'm going to write this fast. You know, I'm on a roll, and you just have to believe me. Give me a little extension, but I will come through with a draft. And then, you know, you can like beat me up or whatever. And just leave me alone for a while. And he was great. He was great. He let me do it. And I had no idea where this book was going. Okay? So here's another thing. So I don't work with those cards. Not until later. I do them on my second go-around. Then when I kind of see the chunk of work, that's when I go, I need a timeline. You know, they're very useful to me because I like to travel, even though it was set in the present. And I really wanted to deal with the present. I knew that I would probably do a couple of, you know, trips back to, you know, Catholic church land or something. And I wanted to make sure that I was keeping track of people's age and, you know, even though I believe in being as fantastic as you want to be, I still believe in grounding it in some kind of reality so that it's even more fantastic, you know, if you got all your bases covered. So, but in this first go-round, it is like, a lot like, and other writers have used this kind of metaphor, you know, you're going into a tunnel of darkness and you just find your way. And you're groping. And one chapter leads into another, you know, so it might end on the street, but I know that she has to live in a building. And then I go, oh, okay, what about the neighbor? What about the neighbors, right? If I also want to grapple with the landscape of the city, okay, most people live in apartment buildings, and what's going on there? So slowly I came to understand the world I was trying to create. And I decided that everything was going to happen in a week. To give myself, you know, momentum. I think those limitations are really good for you when you start writing. I mean, you can always change your mind later, but I think that actually saying this happens in 3 days or happens in a week, and, you know, with these side trips to memory lane, but always there's this thing happening on Thursday, and I named it, you know, it's a Thursday, it's a reading, and I also wanted to very much confront what being a writer trying to write about being a writer, what that means. And it's very difficult. It's very difficult. And I just had to get real honest with myself and, you know, and understand that I actually know what I'm talking about. So, you know, just go with that. Go with what you know. What does it mean to write? And then I wanted to challenge myself. Every project for me is a challenge. I mean, I want to do something I haven't done before. So I wanted to write from the point of view of an 80-year-old woman. Because I thought, how fabulous. I'm going to have to go places I've never been before and really do some acting exercise, you know, and doing that empathy thing. It's a great exercise, you know, the walking in someone's shoes. I try to do that for every character I create, and no character to me is too minor, by the way. Everybody's important, so even if they have nothing to say, they're there for a reason. So one of the things I try to share with my students as well is everything has to count. Nothing is there because you just want to be random all of a sudden. Even if it appears random, it's deliberate. So make every word count. And words are precious to me. You know, I come from a culture where literature and the act of buying books is a real privilege. It's an elite thing. Books in the Philippines cost a lot of money. So very few people have access to buying books. So for me, the idea of growing up wanting to be a writer really was a profound thing. And I care about it. I don't take it lightly. And I think that that's always a good thing when you're an artist, you know, to not take it for granted. I don't care who you are. So I started as a poet, so I believe that that is probably why I love language and words and, you know, just so deeply. And I care about how it looks on a page, so I'm very involved in the production of a book. I am a pest. Just like the artist from Berlin, I get involved with the book designer. I mean, I'm sure they want to, you know, just send me away, but I care about why something's in italics and something isn't, and what kind of font this is. In this novel, there's a lot of texture. There are, just like in Dog Eaters, actually in a lot of all my fiction, is kind of a pastiche, using multiple sources. So I had, in Dog Eaters, it was about trying to visualize the radio dramas I used to listen to as a kid, and I had the little girl in Dog Eaters listening to these radio dramas. Well, how do they look on a page? And then I also had gossip as a texture, just random voices gossiping as a texture of a city. In Toxicology, I have a very slick art magazine that's also online. So I had to make it kind of have that feeling of the art magazines today that also have websites. Well, how do you do that? So I actually really work alongside the, you know, the designer for the interior of the book, and she was very patient with me about making sure that the fonts were their own thing, really were magazine-like and did not look like the rest of the book. I'm not sure we were that successful because there was a time element and I was not that happy with the way it ended up looking, but it was important to me. I care about the whole package. That's the performance part of it, because I am bringing to you these stories where, yes, you're going to read them in the privacy of your own whatever, your room, your bed, your study, your favorite armchair on the subway. You're alone in it, but if I can talk to you as if you were also listening to my characters and watching them on screen, so that it's kind of many layers of sensory perception. That's what I want my fiction to be like. And I think that all these very profound influences on me as a human being and as an artist have pushed me in that direction. And my training in the theater gave me a lot of tools to work with to make it happen. So that when I was wandering around as a teenager in San Francisco, where we immigrated to from the Philippines, and I was saying to myself, I'm a poet, but one day I know I want to write a novel, because I love novels, and I want to write, you know, a much more extended narrative, you know, and see what that feels like. I knew that I didn't have, you know, a workshop to go to or someone telling me how to do it. I just had to read the books that really excited me and thrilled me and seemed close to the kind of vision I was trying to create. And sort of study, how did they do it? How did these writers do it? What's the architecture of this particular novel, you know? And I was very, very lucky, because in the 70s, that was the Latin American boom in literature, and people like Garcia Marquez came along in translation, even though that novel had been written in the 60s, you know, we finally got it in the 70s in English. And people like Manuel Puig, who seemed to have a weirdly similar childhood to mine. He was obsessed with films and used to go watch them, you know, with his mother or his auntie or something in the little town he lived in. And, you know, his fiction feels like scripts to me sometimes. I can actually see the ladies talking. And dialogue, his dialogue feels very authentic, and very funny and very human. So I said, they're close to what I'm trying to get at, so let me try and approximate this, you know, like imitate them. Imitation, imitation, imitation. That was my training. So don't be afraid to do that. I mean, that's really a big part of the craft to me, is you learn by imitating and then you throw it all away. And you keep what's useful to you.